It was a quiet, uneventful day aboard a commercial flight. Yet aboard this plane, something extraordinary was about to unfold. A flight that started like any other, one that would see the typical shuffle of passengers finding their seats, stowing away luggage, and settling into their long-haul journey, was about to become the center of an unprecedented event. As the plane climbed higher into the sky, the serene hum of the engines filled the cabin, mingling with the whispers of fellow passengers. But among them sat a very different presence. Barron Trump, the youngest son of the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. He was used to being in the public eye, accustomed to the whispers, the stares, and the cameras. But today, no one could have predicted what was coming. Barron sat in the front row of the first-class section, an area typically reserved for the highest-profile individuals, executives, celebrities, and politicians. The young Trump had always been a private figure, often shielded from the limelight. But this moment was different. He wasn't just traveling as the son of a powerful man. He was making a choice that would leave everyone around him speechless. As the cabin attendants made their rounds, a sudden unexpected presence entered the first-class section. A man whose reputation preceded him, someone who needed no introduction. It was Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, known for his stoic demeanor and iconic roles in film. He was traveling like any other passenger, quietly making his way through the aisle. His presence was commanding, as it always was. But there was something different today, something that seemed to draw the attention of everyone nearby. But as Clint Eastwood passed Barron Trump's seat, something remarkable happened. Without hesitation, Barron stood up, his young face determined, yet calm. He looked Eastwood in the eyes, and with the grace of someone much older, offered him his seat. The gesture was simple, yet profound. Barron wasn't just giving up any seat. He was offering the one he was entitled to, the one reserved for first-class passengers. He was offering it to Clint Eastwood, a man of great stature and undeniable legacy. For a moment, no one in the cabin knew what to say. The air seemed to grow still, as if time had momentarily frozen. The crew paused in their duties, some passengers exchanging surprised glances, others uncertain of how to react. It wasn't the kind of thing you saw every day. Barron Trump, the son of a sitting president, wasn't just sitting in a privileged seat. He was offering it up, voluntarily, without any fanfare, to a man who had achieved far more than anyone could expect from the young Trump. Eastwood, equally stunned, took a beat before his signature gravelly voice broke the silence. "Are you sure, son?" he asked, his eyes softening just a bit as he studied Barron's unwavering face. With a small nod, Barron simply replied, "Yes, sir." The room seemed to collectively exhale. Some passengers looked around in disbelief, while others, like the crew, knew they had just witnessed something more than a simple act of kindness. It was a statement, a gesture that transcended mere politeness. Barron Trump was showing the world that he wasn't just the son of a president. He was his own person, with his own values and principles. And in that moment, he demonstrated that true greatness wasn't about what you were entitled to, but what you were willing to give up for someone else. As the plane soared through the skies, the shockwave of Barron Trump's unexpected act rippled through the cabin. The murmurs of passengers gradually grew louder as they processed what they had just witnessed. Some couldn't believe their eyes. Had Barron Trump really given up his first-class seat for Clint Eastwood, a man who was a living legend? Others whispered among themselves, speculating about the reasons behind the gesture. Was it simply a random act of kindness, or was there a deeper meaning behind this act? In the middle of it all stood Barron, a young man who had just taken a quiet stand, his actions speaking louder than words ever could. It was a moment that would make headlines, a moment that would define him in the public eye far beyond just being the son of a former president. As Clint Eastwood slowly settled into Barron's seat, he paused to look at the young man one more time, his expression softening. "You know, kid," he said, his voice gruff yet sincere. "That's one of the most selfless things I've ever seen. You've got character." Barron simply nodded, his face calm but revealing a hint of pride. He had no desire to be in the spotlight, but something about this moment made him feel certain. This wasn't about fame, about politics, or about legacy. It was about showing the world that kindness, respect, and humility were traits that transcended titles and wealth. The passengers who had been observing the scene were now caught in their own internal dialogue. For many, this act felt like a challenge to their own perceptions of what it meant to be privileged, to be powerful. They had seen Barron in the media countless times before, always framed in the context of his father's shadow. But today, this act made them see him differently. He wasn't just the son of a president. He was his own person, someone who had the courage to step outside the expectations placed on him and make his own decisions. The flight attendants, too, were in awe. They had seen plenty of celebrities, politicians, and high-profile figures come through the cabin, but rarely had they seen a gesture like this one. It wasn't just a seat being given up. It was a symbol of generosity, a public message that went against the often self-centered culture that surrounded those with power and fame. As the flight continued, the cabin grew quiet. Barron, no longer the center of attention, returned to his seat in the back of the first-class section. The eyes of the passengers, however, never strayed too far from him. There was something magnetic about him now, something that made people want to know more. What had driven Barron Trump to do this? Was it a family value instilled by his parents, or was it something deeper within him that had led him to act with such unexpected grace? But as the hours passed, it became clear that the true significance of this act would not be fully understood by the passengers or the media until later. This gesture wasn't about Barron trying to win favor or make headlines. It was about something much more personal. He was proving to himself, and to the world, that regardless of his last name, his character was defined not by the wealth or the power that surrounded him, but by his actions, by his willingness to do what was right, regardless of the consequences. Clint Eastwood, seated now in Barron's first-class chair, couldn't help but admire the young man from a distance. He had met many people in his time, but it was rare to encounter someone with the kind of quiet strength Barron had shown. It wasn't just the humility. It was the depth of character that Eastwood could sense from the young man. Barron's actions spoke louder than any speech or media interview could. As the flight continued toward its destination, the story of the generous young Trump and his selfless act began to spread quietly among the passengers. But the impact of Barron's gesture was far from over. It would be discussed, debated, and remembered long after the plane touched down. As the flight neared its destination, the cabin buzzed with hushed conversations. The moment Barron Trump had created, his selfless act of giving up his first-class seat for Clint Eastwood, had stirred something deep within the passengers. It was clear that something extraordinary had occurred, though the true depth of the gesture was still settling in. Barron had returned to his seat in the back, quiet, unassuming, as though he had done nothing out of the ordinary. But the passengers knew better. Some had already begun discussing what had just happened, marveling at the young man's maturity and generosity. For a brief moment, they had seen a different side of Barron Trump, a side not shaped by the shadows of political power, but by a quiet, unshakable principle. By the time the plane touched down, the story of Barron's unexpected gesture was already making its way through social media, quickly going viral. News outlets picked up the tale, with some framing it as a moment of rare humility from the Trump family. Others marveled at the way Barron had chosen to act in a world where entitlement often ruled. And while his father, Donald Trump, had made headlines countless times for his larger-than-life persona, this act of kindness from Barron left a much more lasting impact. For Barron, though, the attention was far from what mattered. He wasn't interested in the spotlight, nor did he expect praise. The real reward for him was in the quiet sense of satisfaction that came from knowing he had done the right thing. He had given up something valuable, but in return, he had gained something far more important: the respect of those around him. Clint Eastwood, too, would never forget the moment. He had known many great figures in his life, but the quiet dignity Barron had shown that day left a lasting impression. He would later recount the story in interviews, always remembering the young man who had given up his seat without a second thought. The ripple effect of Barron Trump's gesture was far-reaching. What started as a small act of kindness on a plane would come to symbolize something much bigger. The power of humility, the courage to stand outside the expectations placed on you, and the ability to make a difference, no matter your name or status. As the media continued to debate and discuss the meaning behind Barron's actions, one thing became clear. He had made a statement, one that would resonate for years to come.